Welcome back to the Hemlane Hustle. I'm your host, Dana Dunford, and today's episode is for anyone who's ever said, there aren't enough hours in the day. Our guest today found 4 jobs worth of hours and turned them into over 100 rental properties. Alec VanBeek figured out how to stack 4 full-time W-2 jobs all at once, make it work across multiple time zones, and funnel that income into real estate. We're going to unpack today how he pulled that off, the systems he built, and the mindset that made it possible. Because let's be honest, this level of hustle deserves its own time zone. Alec, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Dana.
Great. I just want to start with it was very impressive when you told me you had 4 W-2s at once. I want to take our listeners back to the beginning. What inspired you to even try to work multiple full-time jobs at once? Most people I hear say, I'm burnt out from my current job. It's so many hours, I can't handle it. How did you even think this was possible to get 4 full-time jobs all at once? And what was that
Great,
story?
great question. I'm sure everyone's dying to know. So I would say it all goes really back to the COVID time period. And if ever people remember back to 2020 and 2021 in the corporate world, there was a lot of, with COVID going on, there was a lot of layoffs, there was a lot of uncertainty about stuff. And if you remember correctly, there was a seesaw between 2020, 2021 and 2022 with layoffs, or companies hired a bunch of people on and then laid a bunch of people off. So at the company I was working for at the time, back in 2021, we had been acquired at the end of 2020, and they were looking around, seeing how we're fitting into their existing company through the acquisition, and they more or less were starting to see with the various people on my team, are they going to fit in? There was a lot of, again, uncertainty with the whole COVID situation going on. They were trying to make sure that they didn't keep redundancies, or at least that's how they phrased it to everybody. So I actually had peeked across this article, I believe. I don't even remember what outlet it was, saying people are secretly working 2 full-time jobs. And I'd always been a person to work jobs on the side, try and hustle other things. And I thought to myself, we're remote. No one's going back into the office anytime soon. Maybe I should just give it a try. So I ended up applying around for some jobs as if I was going to get a new job. And one to go back October of 2021, I decided to pull the trigger and I said, I'm going to accept the position. And I just never gave my 2 weeks at the other job and just continued working straight on from there. Eventually, I built on it over time, but yeah, I guess we can really dive into the specific details of how I got all that done. But that was really the
Yeah.
origin story, is stability, being able to have, I saw it as people look for different income streams, and there's a lot of mentality that companies may not be as loyal to their employees. And so I thought, well, I guess this is the way to reverse it around. Have multiple different company outcomes, or multiple different options. If one company's treating you better, maybe you should lean into that job more than the other. And I thought, worst case, one of them finds out and I would just be back to one job again.
Yeah. Now, did you plan this out intentionally? You had mentioned working multiple jobs. Some people have multiple part-times. Did you plan this out as part of this real estate strategy, of this intention to have over 100 properties you'd have and be managing? Or was this something that you were like, hey, I just want to make as much money as possible right now?
I, from the time I graduated, because I graduated in 2019, but I was already had a full-time job lined up. So I only really got to work the tail end of 2019 before COVID and everything started going on, normal circumstances, so to say. And I was already looking for other things. I tried out the US Census. Tried to work for them in 2020. I had been looking for ways to really excel in the corporate workspace, to get my pay up, advocate for myself with my managers, just generally just try and push to make more money if possible, and also pursue things that were of interest. So I was already doing that. It was just other side gigs, or not so to say conventional W-2 jobs on the side. And again, I did that with a few different things leading up to that. I was looking for various ways to make more. And when COVID hit, it seemed like everything paused, right? And all the companies had everybody remotely. There was all this stuff where there was people just not working altogether with a remote job. And I thought pays weren't really going up that much. Year over year, I'd gotten a couple of raises at that point. I said usually it didn't matter how hard I worked. It seemed I used to get a two or three, or if I was really like a 4% raise, and I took that to say I could get a 4% raise, or I could split my time a little bit between two companies and I could get nearly 100% raise, and also some income diversity at the same time. So I think that was the mentality that slipped in, but I think the thing that really sealed it is I had worked very hard for the company I was at the time, and it was a company in the healthcare space. And they we had done all this transition work for them, like all of 2020. We were like working our tails off trying to get everything in line, help them integrate into their company. And as a reward for all of that, 90% of my team got laid off. So by the time I was already looking at doing this, basically a couple weeks beforehand, almost every single person had been laid off. So I was like, it's only a matter of time, right? So to part of me was thinking it's only going to be 2 or 3 months, and then I'll probably get laid off too, and then I'll just have another job lined up. But that just didn't happen. They ended up staying on. Ended up staying on for years longer, and it just didn't pan out that way. And then once I figured out how to do it and just employ some various strategies, I just continued to build on it up all the way up to four.
So, can we do some math here?
Yep.
I love math, applied mathematics, masters. If I just do simple math, there are 40 hours as in a typical work week. I do the 40 times four jobs. I've got 160, if I'm doing my math right there. There are only 168 hours in a week. So that leaves you a total of 8 hours to sleep, eat, and also think about your real estate strategy. How did you pull that off?
That was a great question. And yeah, I just sleep 1 hour per night. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I only need 1 hour to cook, eat, sleep, and everything else, right? And work on real estate on the side. It really just came down to, it goes back to the whole mentality is that I began to realize I would work very hard, and I found the lesson that perception was key. And if it looked like you were working very hard and you were getting things done, oftentimes that would be overlooked for positions or being more likable at a company or something like that. I thought, hey, let's employ the reverse strategy. If they want people to be remote for safety reasons, and also people are slacking off on that and getting by, if there's all this extra corporate, I guess, over hiring and stuff like that, why not just go back the other way? And I came to the realization that as long as you were meeting expectations, regardless of the amount of hours that you put in, that's all the company typically really cared about. And once I started leaning into that, one, not only did it remove a lot of the pressure because, again, I was not beholden to this one company, but it also inspired, again, to continue to grow on it. And I just started to view it as if this company's treating me better or I'm having a better experience over here, I'm really enjoying the work. And not only that, it just gave me a lot of exposure to a lot of various things. If I'm being 100% honest, there was not 40 hours per week for every position. And I think if I people might not want to hear that, but I think if I were to push back, I think a lot of companies would be afraid to admit a lot of their employees are not working 40 hours a week. Just my personal take, though.
Yeah. And then another question for you on that is basically with quality of work, which you just signaled to, there is a huge difference between you could give two people a job. One can do it way faster than the other, or one can prioritize their time and strategize and say, okay, these are the five things I need to do right now. Here's a better strategy to execute on it and do it faster. Do you believe you were just good at that? And so that's why these jobs said, oh, Alec is doing his job, because if they were to give it to someone else, they would have been less efficient with their time? Or how do you think about that quality of work?
I would say so, but one of the big things is, again, the company I was at during the transition is I was one of the few people that was really knowledgeable on the field I was in. So I was like, if I push this along faster, they will just get rid of me sooner, or they will move us to other things sooner. So we more or less, I was like, I'm pretty much the most knowledgeable person here on this. Why fast track it? And I guess people, once again, perception wise, could see that, but I think you have to, when working in general, you just have to leverage what advantages you have. And that was just one part of the acquisition that really stuck to my favor. And again, the people that ultimately might have expedited, and again, I did do that at the start of my career. I would push things as soon as possible. I tried all that, but I found unless you're really pushing and advocating for either a raise or a promotion or some sort of leadership in the company. But even then, you still might just be passed up on. So I found, and the other thing is, I think there's an often overlooked aspect of workers where your work, the more you do a task, the more efficient and faster and you get at it, in quality you get at it too. So some people, I think, find that they take stuff longer in the past, but the more skilled they get at a certain thing, they can actually get the
Mhm.
work done a lot faster and a lot more efficiently than someone that doesn't have experience doing it. And when you have that sort of leverage or advantage, because it's really hard to know everything about everything, especially these days, there's so much to know that you can lean into that. And so I would watch. I think the best examples is I would watch like developers that knew, and I would understand some level of coding. That they too were slumming things down, or we'd meet for a scrum meeting and things weren't moving at maximum speed that they could be. Or again, maybe for some people, it's also a prevention of burnout because that is a real thing too. It's just constantly going 100%, 110% all the time certainly can lead to that. And I think something to be said about pacing too. So I guess my mentality shifted, like instead of being a top and great employee, I guess just if I'm a good employee and I'm meeting standards and they like me and
You're
everything
you're
else.
a B minus player, Alec, and all
Yeah,
this maybe
yeah.
C plus. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe that's the grade to go for. Because in my mind, I thought if that's the case, maybe they'll reduce my raise from 3% to 2%. And I also think it was a result of the corporate cultures that I was in. It's just there wasn't as much push for cutting innovation. There wasn't much upside to being exceptional, in my opinion. I think, what, again, continued to push me into thinking this way and doing what I did.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of these, I've seen it and been in it as well. A lot of these large organizations are so chaotic. There's not one mission and goal everyone's behind. They're not executing at a rapid space. And then they have pace. And then they have all of these jobs and responsibilities that no one's saying, why are we doing this? Is this still meaningful? Should we axe it? And so there's a lot of people just doing these tasks that really don't matter. And so for you, you could probably prioritize and just say, here are the tasks that actually matter. I do have a question on your calendar though. Meeting overlap, all of that. Did you have one master calendar? What would happen if your boss at one company puts a one-on-one on your calendar, but you have a one-on-one with someone else? What were you doing there?
That was a great question. This is where people get really scared to do anything like this, and why you could say it takes a little bit of courage. But on that whole element, I started to realize certain meetings I would be pulled into were completely useless. They were not even needed to be there. Or I would join a meeting. I found myself joining meetings and saying nothing at all because I simply just didn't have any input, but I was on the meeting. So I was like, there's all these meetings here. And I was like, if there was something that was really conflicting, it could be there. But what I would do is, and again, anyone's welcome to do this, is I would build out, and I think this is actually a good thing to do as an employee, even with one job, is I'd build out bricks of time and block my calendar off with my own meetings for doing things like work, or if I had a conflicting meeting at another company, I would just block it off on the other calendar. And if someone tried to schedule a time there, I would say I'm busy or I needed to get something done. And then so that was one thing, is if you just fill up your calendar in advance, you take a little bit of time at the beginning of the week to fill it up or look ahead. That's normally what I would do. Or I would, at the beginning of the day, tell someone, hey, I have a conflict at this time. Can we move this meeting? And then, worst case, and I don't know if I ever truly had to use this, is you could always just disconnect. If you suddenly lose connection or something like that, most people, I'd seen people have this happen. They had a poor connection, they just dropped off and they just disappeared from the meeting, and the meeting would either go on or move to another time. There's all these different ways to employ it. And I think the interesting thing is, again, and it goes back to corporate culture, is there's a real fear for people to say that a meeting is not necessary. And I found there was a lot of
Yeah.
people unwilling to say that. And sometimes it needs to be top down to say that, because people reporting to you are fearful to bring that up because they think if you tell you to cancel that meeting, they're not being productive, or they're not showing that they actually care. And so what I would do, what I got really, once you have a second job, I got really brave about it. I'd just be like, there's no reason for me to go to this meeting, or let's just cancel this meeting. It's not serving any purpose. And because other people on my team weren't willing to do that, but I was. and I was willing
Yeah.
to take that risk. So I didn't for the most part, but there were a few times where I had to join two meetings at once, and I got very good at wearing two headsets at the same time and muting and unmuting on calls. Another good thing is, yeah, not having cameras. If you're gonna try and go for two jobs, I would say look for companies that don't require camera. That's my personal tidbit there too.
This is still shocking to me. I'm just thinking about the calendars at Hemlane and the execution and the sprints, how much is done and executed on, and it may not even be meetings. I totally agree with you. Most meetings, I'm like, just cut them, but it can actually be much more of the execution and the work. And so it's shocking and both shocking and impressive that you were able to execute and manage the calendars and everything for four at the same time. One of the things you highlighted to me was time zones. In order to do that, walk me through a little bit about the companies you looked at, how you extended your day with companies in multiple different time zones.
Yes. So if you want multiple jobs, time zone, I would term, I don't even know if technically it's been coined, but I'll coin it right now as time zone hacking. And more or less, if you have a job, let's say you're based out of San Francisco and I'm in the Tampa area, and there's a 3 hour difference between those two areas. So if you think about it, 9 a.m. in Tampa is 6 a.m. in San Francisco at the exact same time. What I would do is I had the original company I was working at, they were based out of California actually. So a lot of the people that worked, especially more on the managerial level, were on the Pacific time anyways. So I was like, well, if I start my other job 3 hours early, I got 3 full hours to kind of get things done before I even have to focus on emails coming in, people coming online, people pinging you on Teams. So if you orient your day that way, or you had two positions that way, a lot of people find it the easiest to do that because then there's the least amount of core calendar hours that overlap. And most people also, if you think about it, most people put their lunch in the middle of the day too to stop for lunch. You can put your lunch on your calendar and you could use that to switch. So the there's all different tactics, and at peak I had one in Pacific, one in Central, and two in Eastern. And yeah, if you think about it, and the other great advantage I have going for me is that I tend to wake up early. I could just get and start work really early, already have 3 or 4 hours of work in before I had to switch over to the next job or jobs. And it just worked very well. It would made the calendar situation easier. It made taking on and setting certain meetings easier. And I also, once again, to kind of go back to it, I found myself being more vocal about when we scheduled a meeting, or like when I wanted to be most opportuned, or why it would be ineffective or inefficient to host a meeting at a certain time. And the other thing I found myself doing is saying, I will actually schedule a meeting. Let me schedule it. So I would put it at the most opportune time whenever someone wanted to schedule a meeting for something. And then that way, not only is the responsibility on me, but I also got to set the time for when we met.
Yeah, I'm going to be cautious with anyone who now says I'm going to be setting all the times or switching them.
No, you can't do that.
You had four screens going, if I can imagine it, like all each one two screens, I think, so you did eight screens, if anyone can imagine that at your desk. Did you ever accidentally send an email from job A to job B, or did having four different computers in your setup make it where that never happened?
Actually, at the absolute top, there was five. I had my personal computer there for, again, like real estate
Ah,
stuff or any sort of personal accounting or any of that I had going on for my own real estate stuff. But I didn't because I use something called our USB switch. You can actually look them up on Amazon. They're really cheap. They're like $15, and you can plug. It's basically a USB that you can plug into four different computers, and it gives you a little clicker where you can just click on it and switch between. And it's great because you can use one keyboard and one mouse, and you can switch to all four of them instantly. So that's how I would join meetings, and I could quickly jump between two computers at the same time and also unmute or mute myself. A lot of headsets and stuff like that, they have like built-in buttons and stuff like that. Even this headset has its own little built-in button right here where you can mute and unmute from straight from there. So it would be really easy to just hold in one hand and do that. The biggest thing would be like talking on the meeting, but since all the computers were hosted on their individual One, I'd typically always be cognizant of which job I was working at that time or what place I'd be sending out that email for. But I kept my story straight with many, four different managers, remember their names, remembered the different conversations I had with them. I don't know, I think that's probably a personal thing a little bit too, but I just built that little rapport with each one of them.
Let's talk about, I want to move on over to finding the jobs. I know you use virtual assistants to help basically guarantee job interviews every week. Tell us a little bit more about using virtual assistants to make this happen.
Actually, for my own, I did not because I actually didn't need to. Because going from 2021 basically to 2023, there were so many jobs, there was so much shortage that everybody was hiring. So I really didn't need to try that hard. It's definitely harder right now, that's for sure, but you can absolutely do it. And then virtual assistants is one of the absolute best ways. So what I did is I would just go onto LinkedIn and I would just go down the list of the job titles that I needed. And I'm not joking, I would have three or four recruiters reaching out every day about an open position. And I would just take every interview that I could. And I just kept stacking them on and then mutual connections. I actually had another one that I originally did three with that I quit a couple weeks in because it just wasn't a good fit, wasn't a great place to work, and there was a lot of negative news in the first few weeks. So I was like, this is just not for me. And it was so relieving because I was like, I had just gotten another offer for another place, and I was like, I've received a better offer. It's just not working out, and I'll just switch right over. And that's just how crazy it was. Like you basically had to turn down job offers left and right almost or opportunities. And I would almost get overwhelmed because I would be like trying to work the jobs, but then also having constant interviews at places. And it was a lot. And it was beyond a full-time job for sure. It was a full-time job in itself doing that. So LinkedIn has really become a top place. I think it's almost surpassed a lot. And while I don't think it's there as much, to speak to the virtual assistant side, what people I see are doing now is you can go onto places like Upwork or Fiverr and or other sites where you can hire people from the Philippines or other places, and they'll actually go and apply to all those really hard applications where you have to fill out a million different things for you, and they'll take all your information, your resume, and they'll just go out and do that for you all day long. So I don't even need to do that, but it's certainly a possibility, and there's actually services out there that sort of help with the whole process. And people are getting incredible results. They're getting, as crazy as it sounds, I'm not joking, three or four interviews per week, even now in the current economy, where I think the job market's a little bit tighter than it was back in
Yeah,
those years.
yeah, it's a lot tighter. How long did it take you to start then taking this money from these W-2s and start funneling that income into real estate?
It was over the course of the pretty much the whole period. It was just as opportunities came, and it honestly made it a lot easier because you could pretty much live off of one income and save the rest. And I had already started with the first rental property back in May of 2021, so it was actually before I'd even begun job stacking or doing any of that, anyways. And yeah, as I picked it up, especially once you get to four, it's crazy how quickly the money really starts stacking in, income coming in from that, and it just makes it a lot easier to set aside money, set aside payments for things, set aside all the extra stuff that you just become very dependent on again with one singular job. And there are great jobs, and again, if you move up the corporate ladder, you can certainly make a lot more money. There are various tactics on all kinds of things like company stock and various ways to make money working hourly. But it was pretty easy once you started getting that in because again, you just find a good deal, and that's basically what my weekends were. The cool thing about four jobs is it was still four jobs during the week, and the weekends were still mine. So once 6, 7 o'clock hit on Friday, I'm still just an employee, right? It's not really an expectation to work on weekends most of the time. And if I did, for a few of them, I had a contract where I did, and I would just make overtime then, which is even better.
Yeah. How much of your success do you think came from strategy versus just pure stamina?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say probably 50-50. I think you can, there's nothing particularly special about me. Anyone can really do it. And I still think even in this current environment, you can pull it off. When it's a really hot job market, obviously it's going to make it a lot easier, but It's really just about execution and using, again, calendar strategy, time zones, looking for the right type of jobs, looking for the right job descriptions, knowing how your manager is as a person. Really, I actually started saying I would manage my managers. I would actually, in a way, while doing this, manage them back in return because I just feel like it allowed me to be a bit more bold with certain things I requested and asked. So, I think for that reason, there's certain I could I take someone off the street and replicate it again? Yes, I think you could. But would you need to have certain resume experience or something like that? Probably, yeah. It would certainly help. It definitely helped me. But in order to sustain it, yeah, I think of course, especially if you had a really demanding job or one of them was completely burning you out. But if you're really good at doing it, the other thing is you could switch jobs, swap them out in and out very quickly. You could get another job lined up very fast if you do it right. And I think for that reason, there's probably people that have done it better than me. I'm just one of the people sharing it, but yeah, I think it's probably 50-50 if I had to break it out.
With four jobs at once, I think you're probably at the top 0.1% there.
True.
And I also just think about it a lot, and it also depends on so much of the culture of the company. Those that are not innovating as much, things are stagnant. They're not really pushing a lot of new cutting edge technology or products. It's probably a lot easier to do this because things just go at a slower pace. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And again, where I started out was in the healthcare space, and healthcare, for obvious reasons, is very regulated, but it also just completely hinders so much of the innovation in there. And ultimately, I think I probably ended up on one of the most innovative teams that I where I eventually ended up. But that again, that was what played into the mentality of doing this at the beginning too, is to just I didn't like it. It would, as I said, you feel like you were grinding your gears, you were spinning your wheels to move things forward, but it's almost as like you were getting a reverse pushback. Don't do that, or people will get mad at you for working too hard, even crazy enough, or because you'd be like making other people look bad. And that again, that's really just started to weigh on me and how I thought about holding a job. And if you've ever seen the movie like Office Space and stuff like that's I actually feel like I think I did that after I received a lot of the jobs. But when I look back on that, I was like, that movie is m more real than people probably want to admit. And I think that's just how a lot of the corporate world is. And people, again, either don't want to admit it, or the other interesting thing I found is there was a lot of stuff on, they were saying companies check keystrokes and like how much you're working and like your inputs throughout the day. I was always like, bring it on. If they do that, I think I always thought to myself, if they did that and I got terminated, I'd be okay with that. But I think the
Yeah.
scary part is if they did that and they were really spying on people like that secretly, they'd have to like admit or see how much of their company's not being productive for so many hours of the day. And
Yeah.
that might just be something they don't want to know. And
Yeah.
so there's just so much that goes into it, and yeah, I think that's what really kind of, yeah, I agree. I think the less innovative space, there's just not as much of a push. There isn't quite that same level of fire in people, and I think that's what I was looking for in this. I wanted the challenge. I wanted to make more money. I wanted to have, and one of the coolest things about it is I did get to experience like again so many different job type styles, management styles. I got four different corporate trainings every year, the mandatory trainings they have to have you do and all that stuff. And it was just the way I describe it was it felt like it fast tracked my corporate career. I feel like I absorbed many more years of working corporate jobs in a very short span of time.
Just by doing that. Yeah, it's interesting because one of my key takeaways from listening to you and how you did it, Alec, is just poor management. Because managers should be able to develop you, innovate you, inspire you, have the scorecards tracking, benchmarking, understanding what's going on. And in all of these cases, I just have to think like, how did they not do that? And so that's one of my big takeaways there is to be innovative companies, to a lot of these innovative companies, they just have really inspiring managers who bring you to that next level with what you do. My final question for you, and I know all of our listeners are thinking this exact same thing. Is this legal?
Yes. It is 100% legal in the United States. We're very flexible on employment laws. So I looked into all of that. And again, there's certain like company contracts. I think it's typically called like moonlighting and stuff like that, which is in there. So if a company found out that you were working another job or something like that, by all means, it would be grounds to do that. Or if there was some leaked information, that would typically be, I think, more in the stock market realm, like you were insider trading or something like that. But outside of that, we're pretty free on what we can do on the employment side or as employees in the US. So it's, yeah, I never found anything like that. And the only repercussion that could ever come from it would, again, be fired. And the coolest thing about having multiple jobs is if you got fired from one, you still got the other one. So
You,
that it basically serves its purpose either way. I have heard horror stories of two companies finding out at the same time and then having you on a call and firing at the same time. Never happened to me, but supposedly that's happened to some people. But the other thing I would say back in return is I've also heard people say companies found out and they're like, as long as you get your work done, you're doing a great job here. We're actually fine with it. Just let us know when you're having meetings and we'll work with you. Um,
wow.
so I actually have heard that. I've seen some videos on it. Obviously, nothing that I anecdotally experienced on that. But yeah,
They must have really bad other team members, other employees, if they're saying that about the person who's working a couple jobs and not all the hours of the day.
I would tend to think that, or certainly building my own business or something like that, feel that way. And the best part is I've had family members say that. They're like, you'd never get away with this under me. I'd totally figure it out. But I don't know. I do agree with you. I think management is a really big element in holding people accountable
Hmm.
and like meeting certain deadlines and also pushing your employees. But it's a give and a take, I think, because at the same time, you're you want your employees to have a good experience. You want
Yeah.
them to be excited to go to work. You want them to actually enjoy working with you. And I don't know. It's just, and I also think if you're strategic enough and you're, again, very talented with your time, you could be surprised at how much more productive you might be than other employees in a company. So it's tough to say. Again, I did it for 3 years. So I
3 years is
I'll,
a long time, Alec. For listeners who want to learn more about you, your story, also your real estate and building up to 100 properties, how can they reach you?
But yeah, I'm trying to build an online presence a bit more online, but I'd say the best place is just looking me up, Alec VanBeek on YouTube, and I'm hoping to pump some more content on that this year.
Awesome. Alec, thanks so much for joining the Hemlane Hustle. This was such a probably one of my most interesting interviews, let me say, in the most delightful way, because I think it really goes back to innovation teams making a difference at your company. And too often there's not a lot of that. And to your point, you really need to inspire your teammates and have them aligned with the company for full time, because, like you said, in the remote environment, a lot changes. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I had a great time with you and hope our listeners did as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shana. I appreciate you having me and yeah, being able to share my story. And yeah, like I said, I think there's a lot to learn and yeah, I'm interested to see the kind of feedback that people get back in return. So it'll be cool either way.
Below the show notes here, please go ahead and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.